everybody, and welcome to a certain number of ways to turn viral trends into teaching wins. What is that number? Of course, we are looking for 67 different ways to do it. I don't know. I'm getting a little old like that guy in the GIF there. I'm getting a little old for this kind of thing. I feel a bit like Grandpa Simpson sometimes. I used to be with it, not anymore. And it sometimes seems very peculiar to me, but we're going to dive into some of those trends, some of those memes. Seems like every couple of years there's something new that comes along that really just captures the mind of our students and becomes so popular that drives us a little bit crazy, makes us look a little bit like that cat there. I often have made that face when interacting with some of those things in my class. Now, it does raise the question, why? Why is it that every generation seems to find the fads and the trends of the next generation offensive or annoying? There's actually been some good psychology done on this subject. People have looked at kind of that characteristic and figured out what causes it. And especially in the classroom context, we think it comes down to three basic things. First of all, we want to have some element of control in our class. That's good, that's healthy, that is noble. And these things can be so compelling to our students that they can pull at that thread, they can pull that control away from us. Similar to that, we need our students to be paying attention to the stuff they're supposed to be paying attention to. And again, these things can fixate the attention of our students so that it's pulled away from the academics where we want them to be focused. And then, of course, there is an element of threat. These things are new, they're not familiar to us, we're not quite sure what to make of them, so they can be a little frightening to those teachers. Now, if you do look at those three components of what causes this reflexive reaction to the new trends that are popping up, you'll see that they spell out a very nice acronym, the acronym CAT. So if you ever find yourself making the cat face in response to these mechanisms or to these trends, you can think to why that might be. Now, just like a good cat, we need to be nimble. We need to be flexible. Cats, when they are feeling threatened, when they are feeling endangered, when something is not quite right, they're very good at flipping things around and always landing upon their feet. And so our objective today is to practice a little bit of cat jujitsu, of taking those things which might which we might find annoying and flipping those things that our students are interested in around, putting them to good use to make them a little smarter and perhaps a little wiser human beings. A big key idea that we're going to circle back to again and again today is a quote from this gentleman right here. That's Richard Feynman, arguably one of the smartest people in human history, famous physicist. And one of my favorite quotes from him is this: everything is really interesting if you look into it deeply enough. And I think that's true. If we've got that curious mindset, we can find ways to learn and be interested in just about anything, including the latest viral trends. Now, before we hop into the meat of this, I should mention that we are sponsored today by VAI Educators Studio. Hey, that's me. I come from the Van Andel Institute. We created these resources, hundreds of resources available to teachers to help cultivate classrooms where curiosity, creativity, and critical thinking thrive. If you're joining on your computer, you can scan in on your phone, and you can be ready to join the Educator Studio at your leisure at any point in time. We also always have some frequently asked questions. First of all, there will be a recording available, so if you want to review anything, you can do that at any time. Also, there's a resource hyperdoc, which includes links to all of the ideas we'll explore, as well as to a ton of additional ideas for using these viral trends for good, all 67 listed there at the end. And finally, we have recording, we have resources, we have the amazing Robin behind the scenes. She's going to introduce herself right now.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining us today. I hope you're all having as beautiful a day as we are here in Grand Rapids.
An actual real live Robin behind the scenes. So if you have any tech questions, share them in the chat. She will see what she can do to help set you straight. So with that out of the way, I'd like to dive into section the first, which is entitled The Meme Lab. Now, in order to think about memes, I first want you to go ahead and guess. Usually we have polls that are just opinion questions. This one's a quiz question. You didn't know there's going to be a pop quiz today? Go ahead and guess. When you hear the word meme, when did it come from? 2001, 1994, 1976, or 1341? Robin, when you are ready to close that out, let me know, and then I will reveal the right answer, and I am curious to find out how many people get it correct. No looking it up on your phone, you cheaters.
Only 3 more seconds here.
3 more seconds?
Sure.
All right, Robin, well, let me reveal the correct answer, and then you tell me how many people got it correct. All right, the correct answer was C, 1976. What percent of the people got that correct?
16.
16, not a popular answer. So when we think of this word meme, we don't associate it coming out of the 70s. So you learned something new today. In fact, it was invented by this gentleman right here. His name is Richard Dawkins. He is, among other things, known as the father of memes. And that is because as a geneticist, he had this idea. In the same way that the gene is a fundamental unit of biological replication, the meme he coined as the fundamental unit of cultural replication. So any idea which can survive and be copied and passed on to other people, he determined, or he named, a meme. So these are memes here. These are things which can be copied, things which can be shared around. However, there are other things which we don't normally think of as memes, which really are. For instance, the handshake. The idea that when you meet somebody, you should give them a good firm handshake, that is a meme. It can be understood by someone and that behavior can be copied. Beethoven's Fifth, that part that goes dun 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 dun, that's a meme, right? That's something that can get into your head. You can share with others. They can then share with other people beyond that. The idea you should knock on wood when you want to avoid jinxing yourself, that's a meme. The beehive hairdo, that's a meme. It's an idea that people can get in their heads and then share with other people. These memes, as they share from person to person to person, can share some interesting characteristics. First of all, they tend to be super durable. If a meme can replicate itself successfully, it gets spread all around the world. You probably know this saying, the saying being referenced right here, I am rubber, you are glue. You know that these two things can break your bones. You may have the urge to punch someone in the shoulder and say slug bug yellow, and you know that this person just told some sort of terrible lie. Now, you know that even though it was never a standard, there was no like academic body that conveyed this to you. It was passed on through the power of mimetic transmission. That's a powerful way that people learn, and we can leverage that in our classrooms. Plus, it happens to parallel the way that other things spread too, such as disease. So it's a rife area for making these connections to other things that can reproduce, and spread. So in the same way that genes can spread, that memes can spread, that diseases can spread, we can study the nature of how these things evolve and change and grow in a fascinating way, as long as we stay curious. Now, I am fortunate enough to work at the Van Andel Institute, which is connected to the Van Andel Research Institute, where there are 500 of the world's best scientists who are currently working to fight against disease. Usually not transmissible diseases, but things like cancer and Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. And at our Education Institute, we're really passionate about helping teachers and students think like scientists in order to understand their world. We're going to apply that same idea here, that same approach to our study of the meme lab. So the way that we think about scientists is we start off by messing about, by exploring, experimenting, by being curious about our world. We then use that to form questions, and then we make predictions in response to those questions. We construct fair tests where we can collect observations, analyze the data, make an explanation to see whether or not our prediction was true or not, and then apply it out there in the world. More succinctly, more simply, science is just getting ideas about how the world works and putting those ideas to the test. Then checking our ideas to see if they match reality. And if they don't, we can change our ideas and get new and better ones. That's the fundamental power of science. Along the way, we use what we call our 7 success skills. All of these skills help us to do that science, to think scientifically in a way that really helps us get smarter about our world. Now, I think the greatest of these success skills, maybe the most foundational of them to thinking this way, is that Feynmanian idea of curiosity. So when we think about viral trends, when we think about the memes that are captivating our students' attention, we have to ask ourselves some questions. What can we wonder about them? How can we be curious? What's fascinating or appealing about them? And one thing I think that we have to address right away is this trend harmful? We have a duty to our students, just like Hippocrates, to first do no harm. So when new things bubble up, when new things catch our students' attention, we need to be able to wrestle with that question. I love talking about this question with students using a red, yellow, green light system. Right? We can think about some of those memes being red light. These are not things that we are going to engage in our class, and things that we would caution you against engaging in. These are harmful, inappropriate, potentially dangerous activities. In the green category, we have things that are acceptable or even beneficial, things that we might want to encourage. And then there are some things that are in a gray area, which ironically we have labeled yellow, where we need to exercise some careful thinking. So just to give you some examples, harmful, inappropriate, dangerous, the old Tide Pod challenge that was in the news a while ago, this is a harmful trend, something that's dangerous to kids, and something which we would be well advised to caution them against. On the acceptable, beneficial side of things, we might think about something like the Ice Bucket Challenge. This raised millions and millions of dollars for research to help us understand disease and how to have a positive impact on human health. This might be something where we get excited about that sort of viral trend. And in the middle, we've got a gray area of things that may not be harmful, but which we might want to discourage in certain contexts. So maybe a little more on the green side, but maybe slipping into the yellow side, we might think about this trend of bottle flipping. My son was obsessed with this for a long time. Every time there was a bottle, he needed to flip it and flip it and flip it again. And there is a time and a place where that is perfectly appropriate, but in the middle of class, it certainly is not. And so having conversations with our students about when and where to do some of these different things can be super advantageous. Sometimes these sort of yellow trends, these things that are not implicit or innately harmful, are things that can sometimes drive us crazy. This is because we are old. Yes, it is because this is not our generation participating in these things. And so there's this tendency that I think we need to fight against, to label most of these things red and a couple maybe yellow and a tiny, tiny sliver of them green. It's important for us, though, to step back and consider that question objectively. Not just, is it a little different than what I'm accustomed to, but is it truly harmful, acceptable, or contextual? And if it's contextual, how can we think about it with our students, how to integrate it into class? There is a danger if we always have that light on red, that students are going to stop looking at the signal. And if they stop looking at the signal, it's going to be a lot easier for them to get pulled away from school and into whatever the latest ridiculous trends might be. That one is the Stackaroni Challenge, where you stack as much macaroni on your head as possible. There is also an element of the Tom Sawyer Huck Finn principle here, where if something is constantly forbidden, if something is, we're constantly telling kids they can't, it becomes additionally appealing to them. And so finding productive ways to integrate these into class, to get kids thinking creatively and curiously about them, can help counteract that Huck Finn principle. So we can combat that subjectivity by thinking with curiosity about these trends. So we can ask about whether it's harmful, but we can also ask other questions, like whose idea was this? This is an interesting historical question that gets asked about all sorts of ideas, going way back to who discovered the calculus, right? Is it Newton or is it Leibniz? Which of them was the originator? We can do interesting investigations to try and track how ideas have developed. over time. Sometimes those ideas are the creation of a lone individual, like Albert Einstein and the theory of relativity. But most of the time, these ideas bubble up from collaborations, communications, cultures and subcultures, experimenting, exploring with ideas. And that can be a really fascinating thing to learn about. These subcultures and communities are communities that our students are growing up to find appealing or interesting, whether that's gamers or sneakerheads or Swifties or my personal favorite, the nerd fighters. There are all sorts of different subgroups that our students, especially if we teach upper L or middle school or high school, that our students are exploring. Part of the process of growing up is putting on some of those different identities and thinking about which ones we might belong in, which ones might feel like our kind of people. So the investigation of the conversation around memes and around viral trends can really help us open up a conversation about our students forming their own opinions about how and where they fit in. That's an important part of who they are as people. And if we're going to be great teachers, understanding that can be super appealing and powerful. So we can explore whose idea was this in that sense, from that dimension. We can also use it to ask some other sorts of questions. I'm going to bring up the dance, The Renegade. Here it is, performed by several different creatures. This dance was originated, it was invented by someone called Jalea Harmon in Atlanta, Georgia, I believe. But it was not popularized by her. People perhaps in her local community knew it, but it didn't really take off in popularity. It didn't really enter the popular conscience until it was performed by one of TikTok's most famous personalities, which is an interesting parallel to lots of other things that have happened throughout history. Right? There's all sorts of situations where somebody is the originator of an idea, where somebody does key work at developing an idea, but they're not the one who is associated with it, who gets the credit for it. And so we can use this investigation, this search for where did this idea come from, as a way to highlight situations in which people have not been recognized as the originator or the creator of an idea until some careful historical work was done. So we can ask whose idea was this. We can also ask, how did it evolve? How did it spread? What does its life cycle look like? And this is where I get particularly excited. Google Trends will be your friend here. You can ask this question with your students. You have a new trend, it's starting to take off. You can say, okay, what is the pattern of this trend's life cycle going to look like? If you go to Google Trends, you can search for any search term, and it will tell you based on web search or news search or image search or video search, how common this thing has been over time. So this is a look at the life cycle of the 6-7 meme, right? How it spread throughout the culture. You can see it really taking off last fall, peaking out sort of in November, and now it is on its downslide, as you probably can tell. You can also adjust the time scale, so you can look at it since 2004. 6-7 was occasionally searched for because people are doing their math homework or something, but it all of a sudden spiked up and then very quickly is in the process of falling off. This, conversely, is the Ice Bucket Challenge. You can see where its spike and where its fall off occurred. You can compare the relative popularity of different searches. And all of a sudden, you can start to get curious around this kind of thing, right? You can start to have that Feynmanian curiosity to say, okay, what other questions can we ask? What am I curious to investigate more about? This right here is the Google Trends for doom scrolling. Take a peek at that. It spikes right in there around the pandemic, and then it continues to grow and grow. As you notice these different life cycles, as you notice these patterns, you can start to get curious about just about any word, right? Some of these words that you might have heard in your class, depending on the grade level that you teach. What does their pattern look like? And when we start asking those questions, we start catalyzing that curiosity in our students. It doesn't have to be current trends. You can also get investigative about some of more typical, more common words. Handrail, pliers, Enron. How have these search terms waxed and waned in popularity over time, and why? Sometimes words take a very different pattern still. This is the word unfriend, which nobody searched for way back in early 2000s or the mid 2000s, but that once it grew, has stayed around, has entered the population, it's become endemic. It's a wonderful lens through which to view this idea that language is always changing. Right? We've got this constant debate about prescriptivism and descriptivism as we think about language. Right? This shows how the language is always evolving, and we can think about how it might evolve in the future. We can also ask, what patterns do we see? Sometimes we've got a trend, a meme that flares and fades. Other times it hangs out for a while at a low level of popularity as it's incubated in some community, and then it breaks out. Other times it becomes endemic, like unfriending. Sometimes a trend will start to break out and then not make it, and we can ask our students why. Why do you think this is the case? What causes something to not take off, or take off and fade, or take off and endure? You can have students think about the characteristics which might help one trend to take off or not. So as you get curious and explore things with your students, Robin is going to open up a poll. Consider, what are you curious to explore with your kids?
People are reading them a little bit and they're just starting to come in. So let's give it about 5 more seconds, Ben.
I love these conversations. When something is on your kids' minds, you can start to get curious about it. Right? If you walk away with one thing, that's something that I hope you walk away with, is as these trends bubble up, we can approach them with an attitude of curiosity. Robin, what do we see there?
Okay. So people are curious about all of these. They're such great ideas. But at the top, we have a tie. What is its life cycle and the why?
Outstanding. Glad to see that. We can also, we've hinted at this, but we can use these as launching off points, as hooks to launch conversations into academic subjects, like people who have not received appropriate recognition for their achievements, like the evolution and the nature of language. We can also think about our students as communicators, and we can study how memes catch our attention and spread, and we can take some of those characteristics and use those to help our students understand how to communicate effectively, perhaps in their writing. We can use these conversations to think about how other things might reproduce and spread, things like disease, right? You could have students creating a life cycle of a meme posters, life cycle of a disease. You can use these to launch an inquiry into psychology. Why are these successful? What parts of the brain do they activate? Right? What happens in your amygdala? What happens in your prefrontal cortex, again, depending on your grade level? But you can use it to get curious about what these viral trends are actually doing inside the mind. And you can get curious about doing some data sleuthing. For example, this is the search history for hippopotamus. Hippopotamus has a really weird search history going back to 2004 there. It almost looks like a heartbeat. You know why? I'll give you a clue. It peaks every year between November 30 and December 31st. The month of December is particularly popular, and it's not because hippos are particularly festive creatures around the holiday season, although there is a song, I Want a Hippopotamus for Christmas, which is responsible for that spike. As people look for that song around the holidays, all of a sudden you can see that blip in the pattern. So getting your students to do some critical thinking as they do some data sleuthing can be a really powerful thing. We can also have fun and games with memes. Part of the joy of science is that it lets us make predictions about the world. So you can have predictions like, when will this new idea, this new trend peak? Or when will it fade? I love this question because it forces you to think scientifically, to think clearly about setting up some good parameters. What is the criteria we're going to use? Are we going to just focus on a specific geographic region, or are we thinking globally? What percent of its peak usage does it have to get down to before we'll say that it fades? Setting some clear metrics in advance is a wonderful part of teaching kids to think and act like scientists. You can compare the popularity of different memes into the future, different trends into the future. Which ones do they think will take off and why? Again, you're getting them to think curiously. You're getting them to think like scientists about the stuff that they are interested in. You can also have them, in the same way that we want them to build with their hands, be digital builders as well. You might not be particularly skilled at making educational memes, but the odds are your kids can come up with some really good stuff. So one thing you can do is have them express their understanding of content you're learning via memes. And it doesn't just have to be pictorial memes, it can be educational videos. You can challenge them to see how many people can view those different videos, how many people can they teach about the content that they're learning. And perhaps my favorite game is a version of the game, What Do You Meme? This is like the apples to apples game where there's a judge and then people play different cards. But what you do here is your cards are meme pictures and your judge cards, the cards the judges look at, are connected to something you're learning. For instance, The Giver. You might have a bunch of different scenes from that book that you are studying, and then your students get a selection of 7 different meme cards, and they have to figure out which of those connects most closely to Jonas's decision to leave. They can play their cards, and the judge has to decide which of those fits best. And they can have this conversation, amusing conversation, but also a deep conversation about which one is the best to describe that decision to leave and why. So 3 little games there. Final poll for the day. Robin will open that up, and then we'll bring this thing to a close.
All right, still rolling in. Let's just cut it off in about 5 seconds again.
We know we're exploring a lot of different ideas. If you do want to carry on the conversation, you've got my email right there. I'd love to investigate these more deeply with any of you. Robin, what do we see from those poll results?
Again, all of these pique some interest, but at the very top at 70%, we have What Do You Meme?
Outstanding, outstanding. I love that as well. We can integrate these into our classroom management. For instance, attention signals. This one's all over the place right now. This is a meme, the class, yes, yes from whole brain teaching, but it doesn't have to be like that. The new 67, by the way, is going to be 41 with a little hand signal. You could use that as your call and response attention signal. You can involve students in this process, come up with the best ones together based on what's popular with them right now. Teachers are always looking for new rewards. I used to give out something little like a paperclip that kids could turn into necklaces. But you can give out the right to use a particular meme in class, a particular saying. You can also do that collectively. If there's something that's being overused, you can ban it, but allow them to earn the right through careful work to celebrate their excellence by bringing that back into permissibility in class. The big takeaways here, what can we glean from memes? A couple big lessons. First, our students are living in this world where they're bombarded with ideas from the culture all the time. If we completely ignore it, we don't help them learn how to navigate, how to surf this brave new world. But if we can find appropriate ways to integrate these into class, we can have these conversations that help our students learn and grow. These are a way that students are finding and expressing their identity and belonging. And that's an important part of who our students are and something that we can help shape, at least in part, so that they can develop in wise, healthy ways. If you have that sort of reflexive action, capitalizing on your curiosity can conquer that cat gag reflex and help you avoid some of that tension in class. And most importantly, this is some stuff that's interesting and important to our students. And so figuring out ways to be curious about it, to learn about it, and to teach with it can help us form the connection that's at the heart of all good teaching. Thank you very much for your time. You've got my contact information if you'd like to carry on the conversation. At the end, when we close out, there will be a survey if you want to fill that out. We'd love to hear more from you. Of course, there's all sorts of social ways you can connect with VAI. But with that, I'd like to bring this to a close and allow you to go forth and live curiously. Thank you for all that you do. Have a great day.